Afternoon, everyone, and as John says, I'm Jill Watt, I'm Director of the Foundation Alumni and Events team, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon to this talk and to introduce our speaker, the amazing Dr. Phil Differ. Phil is a comedy writing legend and stand-up comedian, and we're also proud to say that he is a graduate of GCU. This afternoon, as John said, he's going to share some of his exceptional career journey with us, giving you some advice and lessons learnt along the way. But first, I'm just going to share a little more detail about Phil. In a career spanning over 40 years, Phil has produced, directed and written some of Scotland's most popular and best-loved comedy shows. By the time he graduated from GCU in 1982, he was already writing for Naked Radio, starring Tony Roper and Gregor Fisher. Thereafter, he went on to write for numerous Scottish comedy shows, such as A Kick Up the 80s, Spitting Image, and Not the 9 o'clock News, before his big break in 1983 when he became assistant producer with BBC Scotland's comedy unit. Phil was promoted to senior producer and wrote and produced award-winning comedies such as City Lights, Naked Video and Scotch and Rye with the legendary Ricky Fulton. Phil is perhaps most noted for creating and writing Only an Excuse, which ran for an incredible 27 years on the BBC. I had to read that, a few times there, Phil, to actually go 27 years, so I'm feeling old. After leaving the BBC, Phil joined the Comedy Unit, Scotland's top independent production company, responsible for shows like Still Game and the Dunbar Show. Phil worked on various projects, including producing Radio Scotland's longest-running comedy show, Watson's Wind Up. At 47, on the recommendation of comedian Fred Macaulay, Phil decided it was time for a new adventure and opted to try stand-up comedy. He embraced the freedom of stand-up and has performed for the past 20 years. We're extremely grateful for all Phil does for the university. He's been very, very generous in giving us back his time and sharing his expertise. So we're thrilled to have you back again to do that this afternoon. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce the amazing Dr. Phil Differ, and it's over to you, Phil.
That coming to Glasgow Tech, as it was then, was the most significant thing in my life. And I'm not just saying that because I'm here and because I've been asked to speak. I was working for the post office at the time, British Telecom, Scottish Telecom as it was, as an accounts clerk. Basically, people phoned up and complained about their phone bills, and you just basically say to them, well, if you don't like it, away and invent another network, because it was a monopoly at that time. And it was horrible just dealing with irate customers, and you just didn't care about them or anything like that. I knew I needed to do something different. And I'd always been drawn towards writing. And I'll give you 3 examples of that from my childhood. When the signs are always there, I think, if you look back and you see some of the things that you were doing. I met a guy one day, I must have been about 7 or 8, and I met a guy called Joe Glover in Kilsyth, where I lived, brought up. And Joe had a copy of a comic called The Valiant. I mean, the older guys might remember that. And there was a competition in The Valiant. You sent in a joke, and Joe had sent in a joke, and it had been printed, and he was showing me it, and he said, look at that, I've had my joke printed, I've won £1. And it said, underneath the joke, it said, J. Glover, Kilsyth, £1. And I thought that something rattled there. I thought that would be quite good, getting paid to write jokes, because in Kilsyth and most places, the guys that knew the jokes, the guys that had the new jokes, there was a kudos about it, there was something special about that. And I was kind of drawn to that, quite fancied that. Then a couple of years after that, another writing competition came up, and I won it for the district that I was in, Stirlingshire, and that was with Cadbury's. And I won something like 5 million bars of chocolate or something like that, which I had to share it with everybody in the school, which I was raging about. I gave them the Bourneville and tried to keep all the good ones. But that, again, there's a wee thing there saying, maybe writing's maybe something that you could do. And the final one was I entered a competition in Blue Peter when I was about, I must have been 9 or 10. And I didn't win it, but I got a consolation prize. I got a Blue Peter badge. They sent me a Blue Peter badge, and I wore it with pride. and everybody, I was king for the day with my Blue Peter badge. The story I wrote wasn't a comedy. The story I wrote was about the sinking of the Bismarck in 1943, which obviously I was very taken by. So I'd written this story, and I got rewarded for it with a Blue Peter badge. So there was 3 examples that we're writing. There was wee signs there that maybe I had something to offer. Maybe I wasn't bad at this. So you fast forward, as I say, I'm working in the post office. I'm hating it. And I know I need to get out. I need to do something different. And the only thing I could think of was journalism. That was the only thing I could think of writing. So I came here. I wandered down here and picked up a curriculum. I said to Glasgow Tech, as it was, and picked up a copy of the curriculum. It was quite late. It was about August, September, and all the places had been filled. But I was planning ahead for next year. This was May. So I picked up this thing and I read about communication studies. It's a 2-year course, and I wrote, actually, I read about it, and I was so, excited by the idea. I wrote to them just in case there were any vacancies. And lo and behold, I was finishing my driving lessons, because I was a part-time driving instructor at that time as well. And I came in, it was a Thursday night. I came in from my driving lesson, having teaching somebody to drive, and the guy my uncle who ran the School of Motoring says, there was a guy phoned for you from Glasgow Tech, and I thought it was a wind-up. I thought it was one of my pals had done this, a great laugh. They'd left a number. When I phoned back, it was about 9:30 at night. It was a guy called Martin Carter, and he was still there, waiting for my phone call. And he says, well, as fate would have it, he says, we've got a vacancy. And because I was a bit older at that time, I was 24, right? That made, I was a kind of mature student, and they liked having mature students on board. So anyway, I arranged an interview, went in the next day, which was a Friday, and I was interviewed by Martin Carter and Ian Mowat. And we talked for about 45 minutes, and Martin turned to Ian, and Ian nodded and said yes. And Martin said, right, we're offering you a post on the course, which is a bit of, it's quite a surprise to be, that dropped upon you. And I sat there, and I must have saw my face screwing up. And they said, well, look, take the weekend over it to think about it. And I said, no, if I take the weekend to think about it, I'll probably bottle it and say no. I said, so I'll just say yes right now. Sign me up. I'm in, count me in, whatever. And he said, well, still take it. I said, no, absolutely, whatever, I'm doing it, and that's it. So I had the great pleasure of that day of going back to my work at the post office up at Hearn House up at top of St Vincent Street, and handing in my notice. And if anybody there who's been in a rotten job, it destroys you working in a job that you hate. So there was great pleasure in handing in my resignation notice and working my 4 weeks. And then, in September, I think it was, starting here on this two-year course in communication studies, which involved television, radio, a bit of writing, a bit of studying this, projects, two-year course thing. Anyway, while I was there, there was a radio show started called Naked Radio, Radio Scotland, and as fate would have it, Ian Mowat, the same Ian Mowat had interviewed me and who was also my tutor, was writing for Naked Radio. So I said to him, look, I really fancy doing that. So he took me along to a recording of it, which was in Edinburgh, BBC studio in Edinburgh, and it was very rough. And to me anyway, the writers they were all new. I hadn't written for this, but I just was going along to see what it was like and meet the cast and that sort of thing. Very good cast: Gregor Fisher, Tony Roper, Ron Bain, Elaine C. Smith popped in, Johnny Watson, Paul Young, a really good cast. And I just was hooked by it. That was the thing that I wanted to do, was write jokes for radio initially, and then telly, because I'd always looked at, see when you see the end of a television comedy program and the credits were running, it was always written by, and it would be the same 6 names, like the TV Centre elite, if you like. And I would look at that, Two Ronnies, programs like that, and I would look at that and say, how do you do that? So I need to do that. I want to do that. So Ian Mowat, who I have to thank, Ian passed away. He was a lecturer here for many years, passed away a couple of years ago. Ian took me under his wing, sort of thing, and cajoled me and pushed me and says, like, never mind sitting there, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, write some jokes, go away and write some jokes and take them to the show and put them in the show, and some will get rejected and some of them will get used. And by doing that and taking criticism on board, so the reason this joke doesn't work is because X, Y, Z, or learning how to hone the feed line and the punch line and the importance of how you structured your sentences, dialogue. It's not prose you're writing. I managed to get a couple of gags on, and they weren't very good gags, so I'm not going to repeat them. I'm not particularly proud of them, but I'm not going to repeat them. And while that was happening, there was also a thing called Kick Up the 80s. And the guy who was the script editor and eventually producer of Kick Up the 80s was also the producer of Naked Radio. So he said to me, why don't you come along? We're filming, can't you come along and see how filming works, and maybe learn about how the actors work, how the whole thing functions, and you might want to write for some television. And I'm like, absolutely, but trying to act cool, of course. So I always remember the day I went filming, we went along to, it was Bearsden Shopping Centre, Mulgai Shopping Centre, beg your pardon. It's basically the same anyway, aren't they? And the cast who were in Kick Up the 80s at that time was Tracy Ullman, Robbie Coltrane, Roger Sloman, Ron Bain, and Rick Neal. So I'm sitting watching these guys doing sketches, not my sketches, other people's sketches, and how brilliant they were. And I thought to myself, that is it. That is what I need to do. So went home and started writing, and most of the stuff was getting rejected. And the script editor at the time was a guy called Laurie Rowley, who was the personification of the blunt Yorkshireman. If he didn't like your stuff, he would just tell you it was crap, and that was it. There was no explanation. And you'd get huffy and away you go. And of course, I saw myself as the new guy, like the future of Scottish comedy writing, and Laurie was the establishment, and I was at the establishment. But one of the important things about Laurie, and we did have some arguments and what have you, but I learned so much from him, and that's something that's really important, is you learn from people who are, he was doing it. I mean, he was a script editor, he was a very well respected comedy writer, he'd written for every show you care to mention. And when he was taking time to argue with me that I was wrong, at least he was taking time. He must have thought I was worth it, I was worthy of the argument. And he would offer advice, and he would say, it's up to you whether you take it. I think you should do this, I think you should do that. And of course, me being me, would go, I'm not doing what he tells me to do. But eventually, when I realised that maybe this guy knows what he's talking about, and I started taking advice from him and applying it to my ideas. He wasn't asking me to change my ideas, it was just the way I was structuring things and some of the subjects that I was writing about. Like, for instance, what did I know about mother-in-laws? But I was writing mother-in-law jokes and stuff I had no idea what I was talking about. Write about what you know. That's a phrase that kept coming up again and again. Write about what you know. So I ended up in that series of Kick Up the 80s. I think the thing that kind of got me recognised was that I wrote a version of the deck of cards delivered by Robbie Coltrane as Ian Paisley. Which was a kind of send up of a deck of cards, and I go at religion basically, generally, and that was a big that was a kind of breakthrough moment for me, because then after that the other productions wanted to know who had written that. I'd written other things as well, other parodies and sketches and quickies and things like that. Really good hit rate. Thanks to Colin Gilbert, who was the producer, the script editor who has helped me, and Laurie, his co-script editor, who's helped me as well. So these guys were pushing me along, and now I found that the more I took their advice, but added to my own sort of bullshiness, the more success I was getting. We then did a programme called Laugh, I Nearly Paid My Licence Fee, with Robbie Coltrane again. And John Sessions this time, and that weirdly, weirdly. That wasn't very much a success, although an awful lot of people seem to know the benefit of 25, 30 years time down the line. A lot of people seem to quite like it. But we did that, and in that I wrote, again, this thing, write about what you know. I like writing about religion and the nonsense of it. I don't want to offend anyone. I don't mean the nonsense of it, but the way I saw it. And I wrote a character called Mason Boyne, which Robbie Coltrane played, a kind of over-the-top orangeman sort of thing. And that had never been done before. And that was we felt we were pushing back the boundaries of comedy by doing things like that, by getting into new subjects. So at that time, I was still living in Cumbernauld. My wife, who incidentally I met at college as well, it's another one of the most important things in my life, and that happened through coming here. My wife was working in the tax office, and I was living in a flat. I was in the flat Cumbernauld. I wasn't allowed to put the heating on. Nothing changes, does it? And writing for every show that was available. Back in the day, like things like Three of a Kind, Not a 9 O'Clock News, Spit and Image, The Grumbleweeds, Little and Large, ending with Noel Edmonds in it. They all took freelance material, so the market was very open, and you could write loads and loads of stuff and send it, and they would use it. And if they liked what you were doing, they would get in touch with you again, and they would pass you on to other script editors. There was a really healthy writers' market, if you like. That you were able to send your stuff freelance to, and I was gradually building up a reputation for writing good quickies and good sketches and what have you, and enjoying it, absolutely loving it. So then, a couple of years, but in '84 or something, 83, '84, Colin Gilbert, who was by then the head of the comedy unit in BBC Scotland, he got me in. And I thought it was to tell me about a new sketch show that I want to write for it. And he offered me a 6-month contract as an assistant producer, which that was literally falling off the seat time. I mean, it was like, say that again, sort of thing, it just seemed ridiculous, like the job of your dreams, you're getting into work in comedy programs. But it was genuine, but it was hard work. I had an awful lot to learn. Just about the whole process of putting a script together and reading people's scripts and reading them and seeing the potential in them. I was kind of like a sort of trainee script editor as well, and you're learning a wee bit about directing and a wee bit about everything. But at the heart of it was always the script. I always was drawn to what's the script like, because to me that's the most important thing. Being a writer, I would say that. But if you've not got a script, you've not got nothing, really. So I was learning all the time. And then there was loads of programs kicking about then. Naked Video was one of the programs which, it spawned the likes of Rab C Nesbitt, for example. And City Lights was coming at that time. Scotch and Rye was there, established, the late great Ricky Fulton, all these programs, and I was getting to work on all these programs. Some of them you were assistant producing, some of you were just a reader, some of them you were actually out on production, holding up the traffic while they filmed sketches and what have you. The assistant producer job then was a kind of bit of everything. So I was doing that and absolutely loving it. It really was, the dream job. And a documentary appeared on BBC Scotland called Only a Game, and it was this history of Scottish football, very serious history of Scottish football, narrated by Willie McIlvanney, and there it was, and I was hooked on it because I love football. I still play football, believe it or not. I love football. I've always loved football, and I loved comedy. And it seemed to me that there was an idea here. There was a documentary to be spoofed, and Only a Game became only an excuse. And it was the easiest pitch I've ever done for a program idea. To digress slightly, you'll be aware of Alan Partridge, the great Alan Partridge, and there's a scene in one of it's the second season of Alan Partridge where he's pitching ideas to a commissioning editor, which ends up with monkey tennis. And that is a kind of byword for the desperation you feel when you're pitching an idea. You will say anything to stay in that room with the commissioning editor who hates every idea you're giving them, and you can tell in their eyes within 30 seconds, 10 seconds, whether they're interested. So when Alan Partridge says monkey tennis, everybody that's ever worked, you know, in the business knows exactly where he's coming from. That was not the case with only an excuse. I literally went, it was I don't know, a 2-minute pitch to Stan Taylor, who was then head of Radio Scotland. The idea was a one-off radio parody, spoof documentary about this, and he sat there, puffed away his cigarette, because that's what they did in those days, and went, right, okay, good, go and do it. And I was a week later, I was in a radio studio with very inexperienced, but with very experienced technical people. The BBC were always good for that. And Johnny Watson and Tony Roper and I made Only an Excuse, which went out on tape as well and got into the charts. With 3 tapes and all, they all got into the top 10 for a week, and then went out again the indie charts. But Only an Excuse, it spawned, I don't know, 22 years, Jill said, seems like 100. A television program. It changed a lot, not always the way I'd have liked it to have gone, but that was one of the things, the compromises that you make. We also toured it. We did lots of tours, theatre tours and what have you. And you know, recently we've gone back to radio and did podcasts, which is just the same as radio shows. But that was the big thing. That was the break. And you know, where do you get your ideas like that from? I just think you open yourself up as a writer. You're looking for ideas all the time. In my big coat, which is in the other room, my notebook is in my pocket, inside pocket, with 2 pens in case one of the pens runs out. And I constantly make notes. And sometimes I read them back. I don't even know what they're, but I'm constantly making notes because there's an idea in there. And not all ideas are good, like monkey tennis. But you know, every now and again I go back and I look at something and I say, that's a wee idea, and I can work on it a wee bit more and a wee bit more. And that's what I continue to do for the next, I don't know, 40 years or something like that. You know, the comedy unit left the BBC by then, and we made an awful lot of programmes as a freelance unit. The first thing we made was The Baldy Man, which is kind of largely forgotten now. Well, apparently it's a big hit in Germany, believe it or not. But still, Game was the big one, obviously. Karen Dunbar, Watson's Winds Up, Only an Excuse continued. Rab C Nesbitt came back. Chewin the Fat was a great show, you know, for writers. And the thing is like when we did Watson's Wind Up, which we did for about 10 years, we used to record up at the GFT. It was open to everybody. Anybody who wanted to write for it could write for it. We had 3 or 4 core writers. I wrote for it as well, because I just liked writing for it. Laurie Rowley, the old script editor, he would send us jokes as well. But it was open to everybody. And when that stopped, there was no outlet. There wasn't any place in Scotland where you could write topical satire, if you like, writing topical jokes. Now, I believe that has changed. There's a programme that the comedy unit are making called Noising Up, or Winding Up, Noising Up, and that's coming back in January, and that's open to people that want to write gags, guys like me, 40 years hence, you know, can write now. There's an outlet for it, and I think that's very important. And I think that's something I would say if the BBC was listening, like, you should always have a programme, 1 or 2 programmes, where you're taking freelance contributions from writers that are inexperienced or trying to get started. Because the number of guys I know a lot of people who have written dramas and what have you, and moved on and written films, and they started off writing gags for 9 o'clock news. Richard Curtis, for example. I'm sure Jed Mercurio wrote gags as well. I'm pretty sure that he sent stuff in for 9. And other people who, it was a great starting off point. You got to know how a gag works, how it writes, and you get gradually it builds up and you understand, you know, full scale movies like Love Actually and things like that. So I think that's an important thing. You know, to find a place that's taking your material, that will take your material. The reason I got into stand-up was Fred Macaulay called my bluff. I felt like television and radio were becoming very difficult to, you you didn't have a lot of freedom. The committee had kind of taken over, and power had shifted a wee bit towards the commissioners rather than the producers. And BBC lawyers were they were fine. Lawyers were always good. I was going very well with lawyers, but they could always be a wee bit sticky. And I just thought the freedom of stand-up might be quite an interesting thing, because nobody would tell me that, oh, you can't do that joke, you can't do this joke, that joke. You just go out there, you do your material, and if you get a baton at the end of the night because you've offended somebody, that's your fault. But that freedom was really interesting, and getting up on stage. Fred Macaulay said to me, the first gig I did, coming up for 20 years ago, stand in Edinburgh, it was 5 minutes, and Fred said, you'll know within a minute whether that it's for you or not. And true enough, when you get up there, you walk out and you hear your name and the music plays and you walk out. And there's 2 ways it can go. There's one that your brain just shuts down completely and you just stand there, or you say, right, this is it, go for it, and away you go. And within less than a minute, I knew I was really enjoying it, and I loved the freedom of it, and the power of it, and the getting laughs, which goes all the way back to what I mentioned earlier about the kudos of the guy in Calcite who knew the new jokes, who knew the latest jokes. There was something special about these guys. You'd be walking down the street and somebody, and you hear the one about, and that's what stand-up for me was. It was just like an outlet to get the material, get your jokes out there. You don't need to run it past anybody. So I'm still doing that, and I will continue to do that. I've got a couple of other things. I mean, like the other thing is it's good to diversify as well. When television gets fed up with you, I Only an Excuse finished, I say 2 years ago, and then a year ago I got an outstanding contribution award from RTS, and when you get them, that's them basically saying that you've had your kick of the ball. I've moved to theatre as well. Theatre's great. They're much more revolutionary, if you like. Things happen a bit quicker in theatre. You'll get a yes and you'll get a no a lot quicker. But for example, I give you Oran Moore, I play a pie a pint, which is a fantastic opportunity for people. They'll take a 45-minute play, and if they like it, they'll get behind you. But when new writers are welcome, there's a waiting list. If you're here to Byers Road, a script's waiting to be read. A couple of mine I may add as well. That's it's all about getting practice, and I think diversifying. So you do a bit of radio, a bit of telly. If you want to do a bit of stand-up, a bit of prose, whatever, drama, comedy. Trying everything until you find the thing that is best for you, and the more you practice it, the luckier you get, and luck does play a part. It's you send in a script and it can sit in somebody's desk for months and months and months, and then somebody picks it up. They're just about to throw it in the bin. They pick it up and they read it and they go, "This is actually quite good." That happens. It does happen like that. But you must never lose heart. You must keep going and you must enjoy it. And even rejection, you've seen you get a script rejected. I mean, there's nothing wasted. I mean, that you've learned by putting that script together, whether it's a quickie or a sketch or a full, hour-long drama or whatever it is. You're learning all the time, and the wee bits of feedback you get, you build up and you build up. So it's a bit Odyssey when stuff gets knocked back, but I mean it's the joy when you see something that you've written be appreciated by somebody else. For me, that means they laugh. You do your joke and they laugh, and that's the ultimate reward sort of thing. So I took my watch off, and I think it's nearly 22 or something like that. I know there's a lot of questions, and I hope I haven't rambled on too much, but you probably get more out of it if I can answer questions for you. So I'm quite happy now, if everybody else is happy, to take questions from the floor, if you like.
Thank you, Phil, for that. It was such an amazing talk, just in terms of a quick whirlwind of your career. I think from what I got from it was follow your passion. I think when you were working
absolutely.
working in the post office, you knew that wasn't for you, so you were following your passion to get where you are today. So I think that was really good advice in terms of anybody in a similar situation, is follow your passion if you can. So that was fantastic.
You still there, John? Sorry, was that I looked down and then I looked up and then I looked down. There was a question there about VAR.
I think yeah.
I'm not hearing anything. Oh, have I broke it? Have I broke it? I take it that means.
I think we're back on, Phil. I think
All right. Sorry.
There's some sort of an issue with the university's Wi-Fi today.
All right.
But I'm not sure how much people heard there. But we're now obviously moving on to the Q&A section of today's
Mm-hmm.
event. And we've got a lot of pre-submitted questions, so we'll try and get through those. If people want to ask a question, they can use the reactions icon on my screen. It's at the bottom of the screen, and you can raise your hand within there. Or alternatively, you can add your question to the chat functionality, and I'll try and pick up from there. So just to... And I don't know if you can hear me okay, Phil, now. The first one comes from David Cruikshanks, who is a student.
Mm-hmm.
And his question is, do we have real autonomy in BBC broadcast comedy, or does it have to go through a London filter?
What was the last one before filter? A London filter?
Do we have real autonomy in BBC broadcast comedy,
Mm-hmm.
or does it have to go through a London filter?
Yes, I thought he said that. I thought he said London. I need to watch this because there's still an off chance I might get a job with the BBC. So I don't want to completely blow it. I've always felt that well, London it's Manchester now, isn't it? It's not even. I always felt TV Centre looked down on us a wee bit, looked down their noses at us a wee bit. There was a bit of snobbery, and back in the day when we were doing, at one point we were doing Nesbitt, City Lights, Scotch and Rye, One an Excuse, probably something else, and we were designated by TV Centre, designated BBC Scotland's Comm Unit a centre of excellence. And we were really chuffed with that, but I don't think down south we were completely pleased with that. As jocks were showing them how to make comedy, and none of us had been to Oxford or Cambridge. But no, I do think there is a controlling, there is an influence that down south can put on us. Now, I've not worked at the BBC for a good few years, and One an Excuse was an opt-out programme. But as for a time, I think we still have to fight a wee bit harder to get things done. So, in answer to the question, I don't think we're autonomous, but maybe I'm wrong.
Thank you, Phil. Sorry, moving about a wee bit. We are having issues.
I could see you.
We're having issues with
everybody get up and left.
Sorry about that. We're having issues. So I'll move on to the next question, Phil. Next comes from Ian Whitelaw, who's a GCU graduate, and he's asking, what was the biggest challenges you had while working at the BBC, and what was the positive learning experiences you took from it?
I think the biggest challenge was myself, because I couldn't believe I was in the job that I was in. I mean, I'm a guy for Kilsyth, and suddenly, you're sitting at a read through around the table with Ricky Fulton and Gregor Fisher and Tony Roper, and they turn to you and say, what do you think of the script? And you've got to try and articulate and be, know what you're talking about, or sound like you know what you're talking about. And I felt quite insecure originally. And the way I got around it was, I just thought to myself, well, listen, somebody, Colin Gilbert, has given me this job. It's a 6-month contract. It might be the only 6 months. I've really got to kind of get all sort of sense of insecurity out the road and do the job and learn. Open myself up for, to be, a sponge, taking all the information and learning as much as I possibly could. So that was the challenge. It's just like, you know, being positive and confident without, you know, being, what does he know about it? You know, I recognised that there was people with far more experience. So rather than tell them, oh, I think you should do this, I would always ask them, why are we doing that? Why are we not doing this? Because I genuinely wanted to learn. So I mean, that was the start of my education, if you like, you know, getting that 6-month contract. So aye, does that answer the question? Does that
Yeah, I think so, Phil.
I'm
Thanks for
terrible
that.
for rambling up. Sorry, I hope that answers it.
No,
Anyway.
that's fine, Phil. I'll ask. We've got a few more questions, and then we'll come to the chat. I know there's a few people putting questions within the chat functionality. The next one's from Alistair McLean, who's a current GCU student. He's asking, with mainstream comedy changing throughout the years, how have you been able to adapt and change your writing to keep up with fresh and up to date?
What some people would would say it wasn't fresh and up to date. I think you've always got to write what you know and what your experiences are. When I well, even now today, when I'm doing stand up, for example, and you've got much more freedom in a comedy club than you have at the BBC or what have you. You're always really writing about what annoys you, you know, things that annoy you. And when I used to go, you know, you would go up there and there would be a couple of young guys who'd be talking about, I've just split up with my girlfriend, or a lassie would be talking about, I've just split up with my boyfriend. You know, obviously I can't go up and pretend that I've got to talk about, you know, losing my hair and my eyesight getting bad, and, you know, restless leg syndrome and all the things that older people get. And they that's, you know, you have to be honest about it and do stuff about yourself. And that's how I keep it, because as life goes on, I mean, the aches and pains that you get are worse, and everyone takes forever to calculate and work out and things. So I kind of created a kind of daft uncle, if you like, persona, and so a wide audience, a younger audience, and a kind of older audience who both get it. But it's just the way I look at the news, and when I see the news, I'm looking for, where is the one-liner that I could have written for Not 9 O'Clock News back then, and a one-line, a topical one-liner is the same thing, whether it's 40 years, when we were doing them 40 years ago, and if we were doing them now, it's just you're looking for the weakness in somebody to slag off. And I think I just say that, you know, like, I think it's a real shame that there's no some good satirical sketch shows getting done just now. I mean, Spitting Image has been cancelled, given the times that we're in. You know, satire is something that we can use to fight that, make statements and that, you know, and you know, rummel them up a wee bit. And I think it's a shame that there's not more satire on the telly or radio.
Perfect, Phil. One more, then we'll go to the chat functionality. So next one comes from Nick Saxton, who's a GCU graduate. He's asking, what do you think of current Scottish TV comedy? Does it have a future? And what do you enjoy watching?
It's all rubbish, because I'm not in it. No, I'm not working on it. No, it's cyclical. I mean, I like, you know, when I used to, if I was disputing something with Ricky Fulton, and I'd say this and you'd say that, and Ricky would always, the trump card he would always play is, he'd say, well, I've only been in the business 40 years, what do I know? And then suddenly I look, and I've been in the business 42 years, and I think, God, you know, that's a long time. I've had a right good kick at the ball, and there's new folk coming through, and, you know, genuinely, there's a lot of stuff that I really like. I thought Limmy was great. I loved Limmy, and I like the Burniston boys used to come up with some really good stuff. I don't know, the Still Game count as new? That's too old now. When Still Game and Chewin the Fat were coming through, they were the new guys, Ford and Greg and the team, Gavin and Sanj and all that thing. They would come, that was the new crowd. And now they're kind of like passing. There's probably another team coming through, but I can't think who they are. You know, there's honestly, there's loads of brilliant stand-ups, but how that translates onto television. If I could pick anything, and even if I don't work on it, doesn't matter. A good sketch show. That's what I'd love to see, that on television in Scotland. Get a team together, and get loads of writers together and make a sketch show like we did with Naked Video, which ran for something like nine seasons or something like that. There's a market for it, and there's writers out there, and people like sketches. If you don't like that sketch, there's another one coming along in a minute, and you might like that. That's what I would I would do. I don't think that was what the question was. It was about comedy. No, there's always comedy. You'll like some of it and you'll not like other stuff, and that's just always the case.
Yeah, perfect, Phil. Just taking a question from the chat. It comes in from Sharon Dolan. So Sharon's asking or saying, you mentioned your first ever sketch on TV radio, but do you have one that you're most proud of or one that was most memorable?
Probably. You remember the one? Remember, well, Mason Boyne opened. I like writing Mason Boyne because I like writing for Robbie. But the one that probably sort of proud is that I can, well, only an excuse. Frank McAvenny, Pump 2. That's all I'm going to say. Right, I'll say that. I mean, that's the kind of sophisticated stuff I was involved with. The one where Gregor Fisher's the baldy guy sitting in the photo booth, which Hamlet bought and turned into a Hamlet ad, you know, when he's posing like a Haddy and he's doing all these things in it. That was the simplest joke. It's basically just a guy making faces, but it's everybody twigged to that, the vulnerability you feel when you're sitting in one of the boxes getting your photo taken and you feel like an idiot and you're posing like a Haddy and the flash doesn't go. I'm sure people remember that one. That's one of the ones I'm really, I like that one. And there was another one, probably the last quickie that I wrote that I was quite chuffed with was, and I think it was the penultimate only excuse, there was the Peloton ad, which I won't, just a man on the Peloton and there's a accident with his shorts, if you remember, I don't know if anyone remembers it, but I thought that was quite funny. Alan Sugar also thought that was quite funny, as did David Coverdale of Whitesnake, who got in touch through somebody on your Facebook to say how much he enjoyed it. So if David Coverdale likes it, that's good enough for me. So that was it.
Perfect, Phil. Just one more from the chat just now comes from Gillian Watt. Were you nervous doing stand-up at first, and how do you cope with nerves as everyone is staring at you, waiting on you to make them laugh?
Nervous, I wouldn't say I was nervous, I say I was excited. It's an excitement thing. And any nerves is as you're waiting to go on. If I can name drop here, Midge Ure, who's not a comedian, when I got my doctorate, which that's 4 years ago, and I was talking to John, I can't believe that, 4 years ago. When I got that, I was sitting next to Midge Ure, and he was talking about when he was asked to be in Thin Lizzy, and he described himself as the worst guitarist that was ever in Thin Lizzy. It's a nice bit of self-deprecating humour, but he said a phrase, he says, once you get on stage, it's okay. And that's absolutely true. You can rehearse and practice and everything like that and pace up and down the background, but whenever you go out there, something does take over, and it's no nerves, it's excitement, and you've got to kind of contend, there's adrenaline and all that sort of thing. And once you go out there, all your plans are out the window anyway. You think, oh, I'm going to do this routine, I'm going to do that, and then you find out that, you know, 20 minutes in, you've forgotten to mention, and the punchline's coming up, and you've got to, and your brain's thinking all the time, like the duck going through the water with the feet paddling, and everyone looks nice and calm. But that's all part of the act as well. That's all part of what you learn. And you know, the secret is not to panic. You don't. But see, the more you do it, the less you worry about it. I would recommend to everybody to try it. I mean, I know that speaking in public is not for everybody, but stand-up's a kind of different thing. You're in control. You've got the mic. So I would say it was never nerves. It's excitement. You know, and that's the overriding thing that drives you, I think.
Perfect. I'm just going back to some of the pre-submitted questions, Phil, and this maybe falls on for what you've just said there about giving that a try. But what this comes from Jane Houston, who's a GCU graduate. I think she's actually based in the USA, so I'm not sure if she's joined us today. But she's asking, what do you think being Scottish brings to being funny? Do you think it's us Scottish people that are funny, or what is it? What's the magic trick? A
healthy cynicism, and like we Scottish comedy. I think it's the comedy of survival. It's what we use. It's the worse the situation, the better the gags. Almost, you know, we use humour. It's no coincidence that so many funny stories and jokes and comedians would come out of the shipyards, how hard a life that is. And in that, how you use humour to get you through the day and your life, basically. And I think that's a Scottish thing. It's quite like the New York sort of Jewish comedy as well, like Woody Allen and in the early days, Mel Brooks and all the other guys that were there. It was, the community that was felt kind of down a wee bit, and you used humour to get yourself up there and have a laugh at yourself. We're good at self-deprecating humour. We just don't take ourselves too seriously, I don't think, and I think that's a good thing. And that's why it sounds daft, because comedy is a serious business. People would say, but you've got to have a wee bit of cynicism about yourself, and can't take yourself too seriously. And I think Scottish people are like that. I just think that's where, if you, I always remember my dad, we were in Glasgow, we were passing the pavilion, and it was a comedian, I wish I can remember his name, and it said, it was a pantomime, I remember who it was, some guy was in it, it wasn't Jim Davidson, it was before that, and it said something about being the funniest man in Britain or something. My dad's attitude was, oh really, well, we'll see. And for us, my dad maintained it, and no offence here, he used to say the English will laugh at anything. That was his thing. Whereas if general audiences told this guy's really funny, they'll laugh at him because he's funny. You say that to a Scottish audience, and it's like, oh, he's funny, right? Go on then, show us. And I think that's where we come. We're quite demanding, shall we say? But it's survival. It's about survival. It gets you through the day and the life, basically.
Perfect. Just I'm just going to do a couple more from the chat functionality. So next one's from Sinead McKee. So it's asking how many of your characters were based on people from Kilsyth, where I know that's where you were brought up.
The sketch probably a degree of everybody, because again, it's this phrase, write about what you know. These were the people that I was seeing all the time. I used to go to this place called the Celtic Club, the Celtic Supporters Club, to play pool, and the sort of philosophers that were there, the barroom philosopher guys who never worked a stroke in their life, talking about industrial relations and what was wrong with the country and what have you. And I used to just find all that funny. They were so opinionated, and so there's a wee bit of all of them, and everybody I've ever written about is based on a real person or two or three real people. I think that's just where you start off. If you're kind of making up something, the danger is it becomes like a kind of cartoon character. For instance, the Baldy Man, the guy with the 3 strands of hair, how ironic, I was writing the Baldy Man, and then, fate stepped in and got its one back in me. But he was basically based on every vain guy that's ever combed his hair across, and there were many, including my dad. And the time and effort of all that thing, like looking at himself and thinking, nobody will ever know I'm bald. And the Baldy Man, who a cartoony character, was based on the sort of reality of that.
Perfect. Last question I'm going to ask from the chat, Phil, and I know you and I were talking about this earlier, so I'm going to give you like 10 seconds. This is coming from Tammy, and she's asking, what does Phil think of VAR?
Oh, not very much, I have to say. It takes too long. Listen, if ever, I'm working on a PhD called What I Think of VAR. And when I finish that, then I'll let you know. It sucks all the good out of the game. That's what I think. When a team scores now, you jump up and then you stop and wait for the inevitable 3.5 minutes to find out whether the goal stands or not. And that's no quite football. That's not what I want.
Yeah, maybe your next event, Phil, is you come back to share your PhD research on VAR.
We'll look forward to that one. VAR and how I reinvented VAR.
Unfortunately, we're coming to the end of today's event, but we're going to squeeze in one more question before I hand back to Gillian to close today's event. So
I'm happy to go another 5-10 minutes if you want. Don't worry about me.
Yeah, I think this is more or less the last one anyway, Phil. So this is coming from Christine Miller. And she's asking, who or what has been the biggest influence in your life and your career?
That's an interesting one. There's loads. When I was a wee boy growing up, in terms of comedy, when I was a wee boy growing up, I used to love watching the telly, the Marx Brothers and Laurel and Hardy. And then as I got older, my Uncle William, who was a student, and he used to bring in Mad Comics. And I used to love Mad Comics as well. And then watching television, like Benny Hill, believe it or not, before he went off his head, you know, Benny Hill was the guy that did all the ad parodies and things like that. And I loved him as well. And then, of course, you know, Monty Python was for our generation, the fact that our parents hated that. Ripping Yarns which is a spin-off of that. All these different things, Billy Connolly, Bill Hicks, you know, there's so many. And, you know, even like the other night, I watched a program called The Love Box in our living room. Harry Enfield. Harry's been doing brilliant stuff for years. It's original, you know, really original material that he does. And he's still doing it. And Harry must know where the bodies are buried, because he still manages to get away with some of the things that I don't think a lot of other people get away. If you haven't seen it, have a look at it. I thought it was excellent. I mean, you know, an hour-long spoof documentary about history of the BBC, and it just looked like Harry had gone for it and was allowed to do it. I thought it was excellent. And that influences me, even at this old age, when you see something on the telly and it's good, it makes you go, right, I'm going to go and I'm going to do some more writing again. It's just, even if nobody ever sees it, my notebooks are full of ideas and sketches and you know, one-liners and things like that. And that's, if you're writing, you know, do that, carry a notepad with you. You never know when the greatest idea ever and it hits you. And if you get to my age, sometimes you forget them, so you have to write them down. So loads of influences. Bob Hope, there's another one. Love Bob Hope. There you go.
Excellent. Thank you, Phil. Just want to close by saying thank you very much again for giving your time today. I think it's really inspiring for our students and graduates to